All right, Madam Chair, looks like you are recording.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. This meeting of the Municipality of Anchorage Board of Ethics is called to order. Madam Clerk, would you take the roll
Yes, Mr. Wint Pearson,
here?
Mr. Goodstein,
Here.
Mr. Kelly. And I think your mic was muted, Mr. Kelly, but Mr. Kelly is here. And I believe Ms. Pallison is excused from this meeting. Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So before I entertain a motion for approval of the agenda, a few notes about the agenda. As we were this session, we had again planned to focus on picking up an item which was tabled from our last consent agenda, which was a disclosure of economic interest in a municipal conflict, contract, or business from Assemblymember Meg Zaletel. Assemblymember Zaletel is unable to be with us today. I actually don't see that item reflected anywhere on the agenda, so I don't think we actually need a motion to continue it to next month. Although potentially, I guess we could call it out in a motion just to make sure it makes it onto next month's agenda or our next meeting's agenda. We also were planning to be joined today by Dee Ennis to discuss item 7A, and apparently Dee can also not be with us, so I will have to entertain a motion to move item 7A to our next meeting of the board as well. And I don't know if we can request, like, I would prefer to have Dee, even if Dee would rather listen, like, I would prefer for us to move forward in response to Assemblymember LaFrance's request, even because I could see Assemblymember Zaletel potentially having more conflicts with future meeting dates, and I don't know why. I don't know that I think it's imperative for Dee to be present for that discussion in order for us to be able to discuss the bigger picture issue of disclosure questions. So that's kind of not really material to the motion, but just in terms of if others are involved with conversations with her in between, I think we are at this point delayed in getting a response back to Assemblymember LaFrance. And I see Assemblymember Zaletel's question as being it's really just about what she put on the form is the question, more so than the parameters of what advice she, what is and is not a conflict. So I don't know that the two necessarily have to hang together if Assemblymember Zaletel continues to have conflicts with the board's schedule. I don't know what others think.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Was there a question there?
I guess my question is, do you guys agree, or do you think we want to have those two float together necessarily? Like Dee's conclusion that she wanted to be there for Meg's before she's willing to come talk about, like, I think we're delayed in talking about Suzanne's request, and I would like to request that Dee come next month regardless of whether or not Meg can come next month, because given Meg's indication of her challenges with scheduling, like, it seems like we could be several months before we actually convene with her, and I would like to pick up the issue with the Assemblymember LaFrance's question before that, if it comes to that. I don't know what you guys think. That's what I wanted to raise, was whether you had different input.
No, I agree with that. I think that's right.
Okay.
Do you think we're going to be able to get to Assembly and members LaFrance's question by next month?
I mean, it depends on, again, we had purposefully, when I had done my pre-meeting with Jennifer and Megan, we had purposefully pushed back some of the other items that required attendees in person in order to dedicate this session to time with Meg and Dee. With Meg and Dee not able to attend or not willing to attend this time, we now have, next month, our next meeting, we had mapped out that was when we would speak with. I think we have an item from Assemblymember Dunbar and Municipal Manager Dombaski that we needed to talk with. We have another item that concerns a member of the Election Commission where we need to have someone come in and talk to us. Like, we had several other matters that we had slated for the next meeting, so we're going to have to do some either special meetings or reshuffling of agendas based on board priorities, because we're unable to use this 2 hours in the way we had intended.
Yeah, I mean, then it didn't make sense to me. Yeah, that we asked Dee to come next month. No, kind
Or
of.
whenever we schedule it, if we decide we can't, but like, I don't think that we should hang them together and have it be like, okay, we'll just keep pushing it off as long as Meg can't come. Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Do I have a motion from a member of the board to move again the item that does not appear on the agenda, but which is a hangover from last month, which is the review of a disclosure of economic interest from Assemblymember Zalatel, and item 7, agenda item 7A to the next meeting of the Board of Ethics, and to otherwise approve the agenda.
So moved?
Second?
And I approve that as well. So, all right, the agenda is approved with those changes. And we move on to minutes of the previous meeting. Do the two of you need a moment to review the minutes from the last meeting, or are you prepared to consider a motion?
I already reviewed them before the meeting started.
Would you like
Yeah.
to make a motion?
Oh, I move that we we can approve the agenda, the meeting agenda, the last meeting agenda.
Doing the minutes of the Board of
That's my
Ethics meeting of October 19th, 2022.
Thank you. Yes. So move.
Seconded?
I approve that as well. So the minutes are approved. We're now on to the consent agenda review of disclosures of economic interest in a municipal contract or business by a public servant. Do members of the board, would you like a moment to review before we entertain a motion to approve?
Well, as Terry puts it, some of these gave me some heartburn.
Okay.
I want to direct you to Jason Diaz, who did not write what board he is joining. So I think it's page 11.
Okay. Well, that's fair. I mean, he doesn't disclose any interest, but you're right that he is supposed to disclose what board or commission he's been appointed to serve on.
I think you should probably cross your T's and dot your I's if you're gonna file this form.
Were there others that you had concerns about?
Yeah, page 13. And then I mean, and this one goes down to page 16. So it seems this individual is joining the building regulation examiners and appeals.
Mhm.
And they have a architecture firm that looks like has a contract with the Muni in multiple ways. And I don't know. I mean, they claim they're going to recuse themselves, which is great, but like I don't know how connected the contract is with this board position, or how much it's going to be a problem. I have zero scope of the issue, I guess.
So the building board of examiners and appeals is like where you go if you have a concern about whether your building permit has been appropriately granted or denied. And it's basically like they'd interpret Title 23. This is my experience, and others from the municipal staff may want to comment from my experience advising the board and then also appearing. I used to appear in front of that board in private practice quite a bit. The one piece of context I would add is that my experience of that board is that the vast majority of the members of the board either own or work for the types of businesses who also appear before that board, because that's the nature of the board. It's like people who are engineers and architects and home builders, because it's questions about things like how many nails are appropriate to put in a piece of wood in a residential housing development, and what is the scope of a reasonable variance to the requirement for those nails that's in Title 23 that still preserves building safety.
Right.
So we have all these people to me, I wasn't surprised by the fact that he was a principal in the in room architects, and I was unperturbed by that conflict. But it's an interesting
Okay,
question
good.
you raised about the municipal contract. I didn't even focus on that because I don't even know how. I guess if the muni. I mean, I think in general he would want to recuse himself from commenting or any particular case in which room has performed professional work, which kind of applies for across the board.
And he says as much, which is great.
Yeah.
So I just didn't really I just don't have the capacity to understand the contract, if you will, or how big of a deal it is. You know, as you pointed out, I mean, it doesn't sound like maybe that big of a deal at all. And so if you two are cool with it, I'm cool with it too. But I wanted just to kind of put a little extra attention in that one.
What do you think, Terry?
Yeah, I kind of agree with what you were saying. I think you know, I think this is one of those boards where you're going to wind up, you know, with people who have expertise in that area, and therefore will have occasional conflicts. And so I think the key is that, you know, they've disclosed it and they're already pointing to the right remedy, which is recusing themselves in those kind of cases. And so I think it's okay.
I'm cool with it.
Okay.
Yeah, those are the only two that I had any kind of problems with.
And everything else looked good to me.
Yeah, I would agree that we should request that Mr. Diaz's or Dial, is it Dial or Diaz?
I believe we thought it was Dial because of the signature. It looked like an L to me.
Oh
as
yeah,
opposed to a Z.
Oh yeah, you're right. Okay.
I'm seeing it now.
So I think we should request that Mr. Dials be returned to him for completion of the section pertaining to the position that he's been appointed to, and approve the others.
So moved.
Second.
I vote in favor of that as well. So that item is addressed, and we are on to unfinished business. Item 6A, request for advisory opinion 2022-12, where I believe confidentiality has been waived. So we can entertain discussion of the issue in open session. Let me just double check the documentation unless others have it in front of you. I believe it says, one moment. Yes, confidentiality has been waived by former member Wilson. So I think the real question here is there any disagreement with the conclusion of the municipal attorney's office? And then what is, so ministerially, do we want to adopt the opinion of the municipal attorney as the opinion of the Board of Ethics, or do we want to draft our own brief opinion, either referencing the municipal attorney's memorandum or just otherwise summarizing our position on the matter? So I guess first question, anyone with pushback or disagreement with the opinion of the municipal attorney's office with respect to Ms. Wilson's question?
I'm sorry. The opinion of the municipality attorney is that we narrow the definition of AMC 115-140B1. That's their?
No, their opinion is that Joan
And
is a public servant subject to the ban on participation, or like that she is whatever it is, holds an appointed office, which conflicts her from participating in the Board of Ethics. There's like dicta in there about whether we should potentially consider narrowing, should or should not consider narrowing the definition, but the actual legal conclusion is that Joan does not, cannot continue to serve on the board.
yeah,
We are not necessarily the request was to us from Joan, so we can reach our own conclusion about whether or not this is a violation. We had referred that question for advice to our counsel. We now have advice from our counsel. we're the client, so we get to disagree with our counsel if we want to. It's a rare position for me. But so that's kind of my first question is, do we, I like personally, I feel like this is a very good opinion. I thank Paul and Megan for your work on it and think it's clear from this that Joan falls in the definition of having an appointed or elected office that precludes participation on the Board of Ethics. I understand that she has submitted her letter of resignation. So like from where I sit personally, I would recommend that we just consider whether we want to, like, how the shape and format of what we want to issue as our decision in response to her request for an advisory opinion. I'm not sure that I would recommend that we pick up the question right now of whether it's worth potentially narrowing the restrictions, because I don't know that I feel moved to do that right now. I think that the memorandum from the municipal attorney's office wisely calls out that this is something that has been consistent across boards and which has so far not been problematic to the extent that it's like limited participation on the board, although we are all saddened by Ms. Wilson's need to resign because she was a very effective board member. But I didn't want to throw out all my conclusions first. Now I have, but just wondering if you guys agree or disagree. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the conclusions are really well argued. I just, as you pointed out, I have emotional feelings about about this. I'd rather her stay, but obviously, this is a good conclusion, well thought out. So.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm with you. I don't have any burning desire to narrow the definition. I don't see any particular reason to do so, and so except losing Joan, right? I mean, so it's tough to lose Joan, but I think generally being consistent with the legal definitions as we have them is probably the better way to go. And I think in most cases, I think it would be more intuitive that, oh yeah, this person probably shouldn't be on the municipal board of ethics and sort of be beholden to other political agents in the state at the same time. Joan's case is like, it's so attenuated, you could almost see it being right at the edge. But I think generally the principle is a correct principle. And so I think the memo is excellent. Yeah, and I would just recommend, I guess I would recommend that our advisory opinion to her, it could be just short and sweet. It could be just a little letter, see this opinion, right? Like see this memo, board by and large accepts this memo as our interpretation of that clause of the code, which forbids members holding public office and being members of the board of ethics at the same time.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, I think I like all of us, I'm swayed by the fact that Joan was a fantastic board member. So and her position, as you said, is sufficiently attenuated that it's very different than someone being like the attorney general and seeking to serve on the board of ethics. So I think this is the right and necessary path. Who's next to write an opinion? Terry, I know you just wrote, you have one that's under consideration, I think, tonight. Abram, would you want to write a short, or is this short enough that like Paul, you could just pick up and write kind of a pro forma, like draft for us that effectively says the board adopts the opinion of the municipal attorney by reference and as clarification regarding the definition of elected or appointed public office contained within Title I?
I think that would be fairly easy to do, just to do a short response like that. That would save, a lot of the board's time for drafting other opinions. So I think that might be a good idea. Would the board also want to put anything in there about her resignation or the issue being moot? For example, if she requested an advisory opinion and then did resign before that, there might be reason to put in just a sentence in there that, we're not even going to address this because the issue's moot now in light of her resignation.
But we put our advisory opinions on the website though, because to me, the only reason to still issue an opinion here is I actually think I'd like to have the opinion I thought that we posted not like our where confidentiality has been waived, we posted
Yeah.
our opinions on the website, because I think this is one that actually is particularly helpful for future boards and for, for also for members of the, what is it, Ethics and Election Commission that can have the same restriction. And for any future, like, it'd be very helpful to have this memorialized somewhere public. So if I could see it coming up again and we have this guidance. So that's the only reason I agree with you. I
Yeah.
think that the
Uh,
actual issue that triggered it is moot, but it is still, I would advisable for the board to issue an opinion and make it a public document.
Yeah, that makes sense. I agree with that. So that could be just a short and sweet 1 or 2 page summary, just spelling out what the issue is and what the conclusion was, and I could easily draft that up.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul.
If Becky, now that I'm thinking about it, one thing, and I'm sorry if this is in the opinion already, I suppose if we're going to make it a public document, and I think we should, I suppose we probably should put something in there about, I know the memo indicates that it was Joan who raised the issue. We probably should indicate that she has since recused herself. She hasn't voted, and so we should probably just make sure that as it goes public, that we're clear in the document that she has not committed any violation of the code and that she's been very proactive about doing so.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, Paul, we should be, if you can be attentive to that in your language and emphasize, like, thank Joan for her prompt and, her prompt, like, notification to the board of this potential issue and the steps she has taken to preserve the integrity of the board's process since assuming her appointed role at
Yeah, I think
what are they
that
now?
makes-
AMCO, the alcohol, like, I forget the acronym now that it's not the ABC, like, now that it's alcohol and marijuana control. It's AMCO, right?
I think it
Anyway.
is.
Yeah.
My acronym.
that makes sense, just to highlight
Fluency is
that,
off.
and then also the fact that she was the one who actually noticed the issue and brought it up in the first place.
Yeah, I would hate for it to create the appearance that she's been violating the code, right? Or there's been something untoward over these last couple of months while we've considered this.
Absolutely, especially when it's exactly the opposite that's true, and that she's the one who highlighted this as a potential issue. So that's a wise catch. So do I have then a motion from the board regarding disposition of request for advisory opinion 2022-12?
I move that the board accept the memo from the department, the City Department of Law, and direct Paul to write up a short letter to go with that memo, expressing the board's adoption of the legal reasoning and conclusion of that memo, and thanking Member Wilson for identifying the problem and taking the proper steps to avoid any violations of the code in the meantime.
I second.
Excellent. I vote in favor of that motion. So we have our direction. Thank you, Paul, again for the good work on the opinion and for picking it up from here.
Yeah, Paul, thank you. That was really great work.
All right. On to item 6B, request for advisory opinion 2022-06. And let me double check.
Becky, this is I think this is mine. I'm sorry, I don't have anything because Aisha is not with us today and Abram recused himself, so we did not have a quorum to address it. I'm sorry, so I don't have anything.
That's correct. I forgot about that. That was another reason that we had packed this agenda with people we thought would attend. So I guess do I have a motion then to continue item 6B, request for advisory opinion 2022-06 to the next meeting of the Board of Ethics?
So move.
Oh, second.
All right, and I vote in favor of that as well. So that will have to be tabled until a future meeting. So now we are on to ethics complaint for potential violation 2022-11, which is a confidential item. So we need a motion to although actually, I don't know that we have anything further because what we had decided we needed with respect to this item was to ask the complainant and the respondent to come and speak with us, and we had purposely not scheduled them today because, again, we presumed we had a full agenda with other guests. So I don't know that there is anything we can do on this item at this time, unless there's disagreement, rather than taking us all the way over to deliberative session only to make this, like, say this again and come back. I guess I would say, is there any disagreement? Do you guys think there's any merit to going to deliberative session, or should we just entertain a motion to postpone this item as well?
When you say disagreement, like, do we disagree with?
Yeah,
with-
do you disagree? Do you just like, do you want to, is there any reason would you like to go to deliberative session to talk about this? Like, I don't think there's anything to talk about, because I think we talked about this previously in deliberative session and agreed we needed to have the respondent and the complainant come in to talk to us in order to thoroughly investigate the complaint. And we don't have either of them with us today. So
Okay.
from my perspective, there's no reason to go to deliberative session. But if you disagree with that and think, no, you'd like to, you've new thoughts about this, we should flesh out together as a board, then let's absolutely go to deliberative session. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah,
This
I'm
one-
with you. We were gonna talk to them today, or at our whenever we were gonna take it up, and so yeah, I'd be inclined to just push it on to what is becoming a very packed next meeting.
I think we're inevitably going to have at least one special meeting in January, given the contents of what we have on the docket at this time and the things that we were unable to pick up. So,
If you
Becky,
just
it's worth keeping in mind that, I think in mid-February, Aisha and our grace period ends. Joan has resigned. So it is worth keeping that in mind, that there might
I
be
know, I will say as an aside, if there's no action to propose new members of the board by January, we can talk about this more later. I think as the chair of the board, I may take action to alert both the mayor's office and the assembly that the board is about to effectively sunset if we don't get new board members. And that will be unfortunate. Or refreshed existing board members.
That's right. I mean, we literally not have enough bodies, so.
Yeah, we will not. We have basically a month left to do business before we have we run out of a board. So do I have a motion to continue this item, or Abram, you were considering whether you had elements of this you might want to discuss in deliberative session?
I can't remember whether I was there for the discussion, the pre-discussion or not. 'Cause I do have a lot of like thoughts and questions, and I might have been gone when this conversation happened. And that's the case, and let's just move on, because it's not just because it's just it's a fascinating one, and it's one that I have a few thoughts about before I want to talk to the respondents about it.
You're saying there are thoughts you'd like to share before we talk to them? Because I think the plan would be for our next action to talk to them. So if there are thoughts you'd like to share with the board, we should absolutely go to deliberative session for that conversation now.
Yeah, I have like one or two thoughts that I would like to share, and then and I don't think it'll be long. It's just some questions about what this means.
Okay, do I have a motion from the board to move to deliberative session to discuss item let's see here. What is this? Ethics complaint for potential violation 2022-11.
Yeah, so move.
Second?
Okay, I support that as well. So we will, the board members will move from this open meeting of the Board of Ethics to a second limited confidential link in order to have a discussion and deliberative session of this complaint, and we will return when we are complete.
Okay, see you over there.
So I do see a member of the public on the line, and you are welcome to remain on until the board returns if you'd like. And Madam Chair, I have started your recording. I believe you're on mute.
All right. Do I have a motion from the board to continue discussion of agenda item 6C, ethics complaint for potential violation 2022-11, to a meeting of the board in January, at which we will request to have the complainant and the respondent present with the board.
So move.
Second?
And I vote in favor of that as well. So that agenda item is continued. We've already moved item 7A to a subsequent meeting of the board because D is unable to be with us. So now we are on to item 7B, ethics complaint for potential violation 2022-13, which is a
Mhm.
confidential item. I'm just looking ahead to that item in my packet.
And I have a draft response for this one. I know we talked about this last time, but there's a draft response from the board as well. Without talking about it in a confidential setting, this was the complaint that was filed anonymously. So what I think, what the response says is that the board cannot accept an anonymous complaint because there's no way to verify whether the complainant meets the requirement to file the complaint under the code.
And I think we can discuss that item because this is just without moving into the contents of the complaint in a enclosed session. So the framework here is that this is an anonymously filed complaint and pursuant to Title I, so 115, 160, A says any adult resident of the municipality may file a complaint. And the concern is that by accepting an anonymous complaint, we open the door, like we are unable to verify whether that requirement of 115, 160A is met. And it's a kind of creates a slippery slope where people outside of the muni could any file and we'd have no way of figuring out who filed or if they met the code qualification or if they, were who we would need to go to for additional information about complaints. So it's practical concerns, but also just clear like code. Does this meet the provisions of the code concerns? So we had in a pre-meeting asked Paul to prep this because it seemed pretty clear to me that this did not comport with the requirements for a complaint under the code. So I think we can discuss and hear an open session whether you both agree with that. And if we do, we could entertain a motion to direct Paul to finalize that. And well, because it's anonymous, we have no one to send it to. But this is another one where I think it would be good for us to document it and have that like in our bank of opinions so that if and when this question comes up subsequently, we've documented that we do not accept anonymous opinions because again, the code requires that that there be a complaint be filed by an adult and that it be an adult who lives within the municipality.
No, that sounds right to me.
Yeah, me too. I agree.
Do I hear a motion from the board to direct Paul to and I don't think I saw a draft letter from you, Paul, in the packet. Am I missing it?
No, I didn't send it out. I have a draft prepared already. I could either share my screen or just read. It's only a couple sentences long. I could just read it now if the board wants to. Otherwise, I could send it out after the meeting as well.
Why don't you share it so we can look at it, and if we're comfortable with it, then the board we could entertain a motion for me to sign it and just have us finalize this issue.
Just remember, we're in an open session, so just whatever you're going to share, make sure it doesn't have anything.
Yeah, any
Right.
identifying details.
Yeah, it doesn't have the any names on there.
Okay.
See if I can figure out how to do that. Is the letter showing up on people's screens or?
Yes, we can say it.
Okay.
Okay. I would agree with this text and with a motion from the board to, it looks like I have electronically already signed it.
Oh, this looks good. Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
Great.
Madam Chair, may I ask one question?
Sure.
Does the board desire to have this go up on the website? Because typically we have not been putting any ethics complaints for potential violation responses up on the website. I know this is a little different since it's anonymous, so just would love some direction from the board on that.
Do we have any other receptacle where, I mean, I'm inclined to say yes. Like, I don't know that we necessarily need to, like, doesn't seem like a violation of anything in code for us to, in this instance, direct that we put it on the website, just because I think I would like to again, memorialized publicly so that members of the public are clear that if they would like that they can, it affects the ability of the public to have their concerns heard too, right? That they need to make sure that they're filing complaints not anonymously so that we're able to accept them pursuant to the requirements of the code. So my
Or
opinion would
one
be,
other-
yes, let's put it on the website. Yeah.
I think one other thing we discussed was having a little FAQ on the website. Can I file a complaint anonymously, and saying no, and maybe taking this letter and using that language in some way too, if the board doesn't want to put the letter up, or we could do both.
I'm okay putting the letter up. I mean, again, this is a not today, but we should have a discussion about what we want to do about these complaints in terms of putting them up on the web. In the past, I think, some respondents did waive confidentiality and they wanted their exoneration to be on the web. We put that up. In the past, when we did find violations, we put that up on the web because that's the bully pulpit. I mean, like, that's the teeth, quite frankly, that this board has, at least with politicians, their fear that we will find them in violation, and that will be public. That will be a public document on the website. So
Well, clearly, thankfully, that's the next agenda item on the agenda is just distribution of board reports as public records. So we do have that on the agenda to talk about today. As soon as we resolve
about
what
the
to do
annual
with this
report.
one.
I'm like, of course that's a public record. Why is this even on the agenda? Okay, yes, okay. I guess it
So
is.
do I have a motion from the board to direct Paul to finalize his opinion as drafted, and for, I guess it's the clerk's office to post the decision online for public access.
So moved.
Second.
I will vote in favor of that as well. So item 7B is resolved, and we are now on to item 7C, distribution of board reports as public records. And this agenda item has been languishing for some time as part of this discussion that comes up every single time we have reached the conclusion of an ethics complaint for potential violation process. And then we've gotten to 115, 160E and stumbled over the words that say, until the board completes a report for distribution as a public record, the board's review of a potential violation is confidential unless confidentiality is waived by the respondent. The board shall protect the confidentiality of complainants or witnesses coming before the board, except insofar as may be necessary to enable the board to carry out its duties. And then we have bumped into, what does that mean for our decisions and their presence on our website and our direction to complainants after they've received decisions of the board. So with that introduction, any thoughts from the members of the board?
Again, I'll just tell you that in the way past, we left it to respondents when we found that there was no violation. So if we did an investigation and we found there was no violation, we left it to the respondent. If the respondent wanted things to remain confidential, then we just sent a letter to the complainant, a letter to the respondent, we investigated it, and we found nothing, move on. Some respondents wanted it to be public because they wanted to be exonerated. They wanted it to be out in the air that this complaint had been made and that we had found that no violations occurred. Those went up on the website. And then when we did find violations, those all went up on the website, because that was sort of the point, was to sort of like, this is like the power that the board in fact has, is the sort of like, symbolic capital of being able to expose, hey, look, this wrongdoing took place. We very rarely recommend any punishment for these violations. In many cases, the only punishment for the violation, particularly for political officials, is the exposure, right? Is the public embarrassment or the public reprobation of being exposed for violating the code. I suppose what we could do is make sure, if we're worried about that last sentence, Becky, that you cited, I suppose we could, even in those cases, scrub it to make sure that the complainant's name or witnesses who were interviewed, that they're not named, right? So that they remain confidential. We haven't really had a, I don't think we've had an actual violation where we have found a violation in a while. But I would certainly recommend that those go up on the website.
I'm just looking at, I'm trying to find the old opinions. It looks like we have 2 pages that contain former advisory opinions, but it looks like it's just limited to our advisory opinions and not any complaints for potential violation.
Are you talking about what's already on the website? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the current practice. Like, what do we have right now on the website?
Yeah, on the website, I don't think we have any complaints on the way. I think it's all advisory opinions.
Yeah,
So
I
I
believe
guess-
it's limited to advisory opinions, board members, and also we're behind on this because we also need to do some scrubbing, some anonymizing of your advisory opinions to put some of them on here.
So,
And that's
hold on.
where-
So it's just advisory opinions on the website. So no I mean, as you pointed out, Terry, we haven't had a violation in a while. But no violation is put up on the website as of now.
Or just no complaints in general. It's only advisory opinions. There's no reports about any complaints.
Why are we scrubbing? Like, looking at our past precedent, it looks like where confidentiality was requested with respect to an advisory opinion, we did not make anything public. Like, it's listed as confidential in each of the past 2, like the 2 pages we have dedicated to past opinions. And where confidentiality has not been requested, we have identified individuals both within the contents of the advisory opinion and even in the little short capsule summary of what the issue was. Like, looking at the website, there's like a line that says like whether Mayor Sullivan can do X and Y, or whether
Right, I think I must have misspoke. I meant advisory opinions that were requesting confidentiality.
but if it's requesting confidentiality, so you want to do like a scrubbed version of the confidential ones in order to have something up, because it looks like in the past we haven't put anything up for confidential, but maybe that's because you're waiting to scrub them all the way back to 2017, because it looks like back to 2017 there's nothing for confidential opinions.
Yeah, in the way past, we used to come up with an anonymous version of the opinion, if possible. There was just no way you could do it without really exposing who had asked for the confidential opinion. But there were a lot that you could scrub it out, say a member of the municipality has this general issue, and that, and we found that this was not a conflict, or we found that this needs to be disclosed, or that needs to be disclosed. And we were actually pretty good that people really could not guess who we were talking about, or even from what department they were in. I'd like to get back to that if we can, because they're really educational. They're very helpful for both citizens and members of the municipality to see the issues that are coming up.
Yeah, it looks like the last time we did that was in 2015.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Because that's the last one, at least, that made it onto the website, where that says confidential and then there's actually a response posted. So it looks like we probably have a backlog of, I don't know, none of these look, oh yeah, there's like a confidential issue from 2016, 2016-7. And then on to 2017 and beyond, there's like one from 2018, actually 2018-1, there's a response on the website. So that must be, let me see what that looks like, what that contains. Yeah, so March 8th, 2018. We called the we called the requester Boethius. Was that you, Terry?
Yeah, that might give you a sense of who wrote that one.
So it looks like we did that in 2018, and then we maybe dropped off, because after that one, it looks like we do not have anything. I mean, my 2 cents is, it seems like our advisory opinions, we should absolutely try to have an anonymized version where possible. so that we don't lose our own knowledge too, right? And so that members of the public can search, to the extent they are so inclined, for public information about how the municipality's ethics authority would decide on issues that might be of concern to them.
I mean, okay, so but that's a advisory opinion. You're not talking about potential violations.
Yeah, and then we're still back to other complaint for potential violation, which the code again says until the board completes a report for distribution as a public record. That provision, are you guys looking at 115, 160E?
Hold on, I pull up.
Because that one's hard for me. Like, what do we, because I also think that really have to read that together with the provisions of the code that have to do with public records disclosures.
It says it's confidential unless it's waived. So, but what is?
Until. But
Well,
it says
until, right, until we're done. Right?
Wait, where's the until?
the very first word of E.
Oh, oh wow. Until. Except insofar as may be necessary to enable the board to carry out its duties. So there's a potential that because it's confidential, we can't carry out our duties. Is that what it's is that what it's saying?
Or I think, one concern might be if you didn't reveal the name of the complainant, at least to the respondent, they wouldn't be in a position to defend themselves. They wouldn't know exactly who's making, like what special information they have or who they are. So I think that was Dee's big worry, right? That you've got to make sure the respondent's in a position to actually defend themselves adequately.
So you have to break some. I guess there's different levels of confidentiality, right? Because there's giving this all information to the public, which is absolutely not confidential, or there's just letting one person know, which you're still being confidential in one way, and then you're not letting everyone know. But you can't control once one person knows. You can't control how confidential it stays at that point.
Well, that's the challenge, right? It's like, what's our, like, I think we're all pretty clear. Like, I feel like we're all pretty clear that we don't want, oh, I don't know. I guess maybe we're not. Like, there's two questions. One question is like, do we distribute anything publicly? Another question is, what's the direction that we give to the complainant, especially the complainant who might be have a political motivation for making a complaint, may relish the chance to go distribute 300 copies of a decision that's adverse to whoever they complained about, especially in the kind of heated environment we're in right now. And then the third is, to me, it's an interesting question of how this interplays with 390 about disclosure of public records. When we issue a decision, to me, there's 390 is clear that if there's public records request, even if we don't proactively put something on the website, you come and ask for, file a public records request requesting a decision of the board. And to me, the code says we can't disclose the name of the complainant because of 390 what is this? 390-040D, which says the name, address, telephone number, other identifying information about complainants and actions to enforce building, zoning, environmental, or other municipal ordinance or regulations. But there's also these weird, there's also these other caveats, right? That this concerns the disclosure of the complaint, and this legislation does not prohibit disclosure of the name of the complainant when such disclosure becomes necessary to the fair and just disposition of the charge or complaint in enforcement proceedings. That's complicated to me.
But I take
Or
it
any-
that means if we are going to publish something, or I guess you're right, maybe regardless of our decision, right? I mean, whatever the public record is going to be, it sounds like generally it should not be including identifying information about the complainant.
And then also like subsection O of 390.040 accepts any records or documents which are afforded confidential or privileged status by this code from the status of, from being public records that are, just like can be obtained through a public records request. So there, I think until we create a report for a public record piece, because that kind of assumes that even the final decision is actually not a public record unless and until we create this version that is a public record.
Yeah, our report, right? Our report on it.
Yeah, what's our report? What is a report?
Yeah, right. It's like, well, minimally, right? I mean, like, I suppose minimally it could be, violation 2018-6. We found no violation. If there was an investigation, we found no violation. Again, I think in the past that when we found that there was a violation, we full on put that report up on the web, not scrubbed. I'm not even sure we scrubbed the complainant's name, which maybe in retrospect we should have done. But again, to some degree, the whole point is to be able to publicly show that someone's violated the code.
Although there's no record of that. Like, I don't see any, like, this must have been way back because we have no website now that in any way deals with.
Yeah, that's not there anymore.
It's not there anymore. But yeah, we used to have two sections. One section was past advisory opinions, and then another section was past complaints. And then we were, and there I'll have to ask D. D would probably remember better than I, though some of this is pre-D. That's how old I am, right? I mean, some of this is pre-D, and Julia might know, but that's my recollection that we had two sections on the web, and one of them was either these minimal little, hey, there was a complaint, here's the number of the complaint, we found no violation. Boom, right? And then the few, even back then we didn't have too many violations, the few that there were violations, we published those.
So, I mean, looking at the code, to me, it seems like the phrasing about a report is the same phrasing used in 115.160B, right, where it says the board will make findings and issue a report. I feel like that refers to the letters we have been sending, like the opinions we have been drafting and giving to complainants where we have found or even where we have not found a violation, right? I mean, we had a recent complaint, if you recall, concerning, a recreational facility where we concluded there was not a violation, referencing it in generalities because we're in open session. But there we issued a lengthy decision determining that there was not a code violation. So we have issued some fairly lengthy decisions, at least in recent memory, that find no violation, but do so in a very thorough manner.
Yeah.
So I guess the question then is, for distribution as a public record, are we filing that final? Are we going to assume that the final letter we send back to the complainant is a report for public record, or do we read that section of our code to, I guess, allow us the discretion to create an anonymized version for public consumption on the website? Or do we want to go back to fire and brimstone days and put up every word of our decisions online?
Well, I do like the idea of, and I can't remember if we did this or not, but I like the idea of producing some sort of specific concluding document, even if it is just a 2-sentence, here was the number, there was a complaint, we investigated, we found no violation. I think there should be some specific document that this is the final concluding report on this investigation.
And
And
you
then
think it, yeah, go on.
when we find that there's no violation, I do like the idea of us having the discretion to then say, is there an educational point here? Even though we found that there's no violation, would others benefit from knowing that this was okay? Or, in some cases we've said there's no violation, but boy, this was not a great idea. This was not a best practice.
I mean, the recreational facility case is a key one,
Exactly.
and that could have
I
been
would-
boiled down to, I mean, that's a little hard because it was a very specific fact pattern, but it did highlight like this is bad practice, even if not.
And I would have
prohibited.
loved to have made a kind of like anonymized version of that one and put that up on the web. And then I do still like the idea, and I guess you're right. I suppose we would want to retain some discretion if we're allowed, like, because Abram, your point about it being used for political purposes is well taken. But but part of me does like the old fire and brimstone sort of like, look, politicians, you need to know that if you violate the code, what's the consequences? This is going to be a public document. It's going to be on the web that you violated the code with whatever public consequences come from that.
Well, we also I think about this. So if you filed a complaint for political purposes and it turned out that you actually pointed out an issue, which was in fact a violation of the ethics code and not just a general discontent with someone for their demeanor or disagreeing with you, we give you an opinion in return. I mean, even if we directed people that the letter decision was confidential, we no longer have any hook. We have no enforceability, right? Because if the complainant is a public servant, then potentially we have some kind of jurisdiction because they remain employed in the municipality. We could recommend human resources action or something if we felt like this was actually a code violation. And if in the course of the proceeding we have enforcement authority, because we can say, fine, we're not throwing out your complaint because you went and talked about it everywhere. And that's sort of what that provision is drafted around, was to prevent people from going out in public and being like, I've taken this to the ethics board because this is illegal. But I don't know that we have any ability to tell people something is confidential once we've sent it out the door.
I agree. I'm not even sure we have the right to demand it, even amongst municipal servants.
Yeah, I don't think we do either.
The conclusion, we're telling them what the conclusion was. As you say, the original spirit here was to keep people from getting two bites at the apple, like filing a complaint and going to the media at the same time about it. But once
filing a totally spurious complaint, but using the fact of the filing in public discourse as though it is an indication of guilt, which I can't remember what the facts were, but I think there was some actual instance in the past that we were thinking of when we adopted this. I don't know if you remember, Terry, but I felt like there was someone who literally went to assembly meetings and went to the press and said, I've taken this to the ethics board, and said that as effectively used the existence of a complaint as an indication of guilt, rather when the complaint could have been completely meritless.
Yeah. And that was an assembly person years ago. Yeah. Who, at an assembly meeting said something along those lines. And, and we had to tell that person, you can't do it. You can't have both bites at the apple.
Okay. So
yeah,
it sounds
I think that's another reason, Becky, it would be good to have some sort of in some of these cases, maybe we really should think about some official because the other problem with the letter, of course, is that you give people the letter and they can take things out of context. And if they do go to the media with it, if we write a letter that by and large says, 99% of this was okay. Yeah, there's just one thing that was a little dodgy, but we don't see it. Someone could take those kind of things out of context, and without any official documentation from the board on our website, it seems like, well, if you're the media, amongst others, you just have to, you might be inclined to just take the complainant's word for it, when that could be really misleading.
So on my sort of a bevy of questions, it seems like we're landing on, we should put up anonymized versions of advisory opinions is decision 1. Decision 2 is we cannot direct, we have no authority to direct either complainants or respondents to keep final letter decisions confidential. Because I mean, I think there's I think 390 potentially, I mean, although I think that point about you need to disclose complainants' names to the extent necessary for, I can't remember the actual phrasing. I think there's maybe an argument that we should disclose we should disclose both. If we're disclosing one name, we should be disclosing both because of all of the political context that is the background for so many of these complaints on both sides of the aisle. But it sounds like where we're landing is we cannot direct confidentiality for final letter decisions. So when we send them to complainant and respondent, we do not have any direction to them that this is confidential. Don't spread this around. They then can do what they will with it. But we should add brief anonymized versions of our decisions on complaints for potential violation to the website. The one question here is workload, because I think we basically are creating more work for Paul and Megan. Unless we're going to assign it all to Aisha since she didn't come to the meeting.
Got
So
bombed.
moved.
And that's something that I'd like to, or I wish that I had made a little bit more progress before this meeting. I just got bogged down with a couple of hearings that we had. But when I asked this to be put on the agenda, what the intent was to go through the last 3 years or so and have all these anonymized versions that the board could approve. And I'm most of the way through that, but not all the way.
But Paul, you're just dealing with our advisory opinions, right? Or are you also doing that for our ethics complaints for potential violation?
No, I did that for complaints as well.
Oh, awesome. So you've already done the work. Look at this.
Well, the distinction is for the advisory opinion. So the code says that those are supposed to be posted to serve the educational and advise other people about the code. So how I broke it down is for advisory opinions, when the person requesting the opinion has waived confidentiality, that's when you just publish the whole thing.
Yeah, just publish the whole shebang, right?
They've waived confidentiality. When they've not waived confidentiality, then there has to be an anonymized version that doesn't disclose any of their information. So it would just be general instructions about here's what public servants are supposed to do, anonymized so it doesn't disclose who actually requested the opinion. So I've done those. And then for complaints, I think there's a couple of separate issues. So the first issue would be, I do think that the respondent has the right to know who's making the complaint or what the allegations are. So whether that would be disclosed to the respondent during the investigative process is a separate issue than what gets published in the final report that's included as a public record. What I was going to recommend is that there basically be 2 documents, so a slight change of practice from what it is now. There would be an official report, like this is the report of the Board of Ethics, which would have a full analysis of the issue, but that wouldn't have to have the complainants or witnesses' names in it, kind of like the court does when they do a ruling on a motion or an appellate opinion or something like that, where it gives a full analysis of the issues, but it lists people either by initials or just simply referring to them as the complainant. And that would be the report that's a public record. And then there would be a letterhead that gets distributed to the complainant that has their name and address on it. Dear complainant, thank you for, raising this, blah, blah, the language that the board always uses, this is a vital part of public service. Thank you for raising this complaint. And then attached is our report. So the letter to the complainant would actually be very short. It would be a sentence or 2, but just attaching.
Oh, interesting. And then so we'd attach something that's anonymized. So then when they were to make 300 copies to distribute to their closest friends and neighbors, they would actually not really have a document that specified names and et cetera. Right. It would just summarize, they would know who those people were, but they wouldn't, it wouldn't be in there. I think that's an interesting idea.
Yeah, so then it would disclose because what my thought process was is the person who's bringing the focus is on the actions of the public servant. So the person who's actually bringing that complaint before or raising the issue, alerting the board of that violation, is rarely going to be relevant for the public knowledge. And then there is that portion in the distribution as a public record, that public records that Becky read earlier that talks about protecting the identifying information of complainants and witnesses. So that way there would be no issue of the board ever violating that, because the complainant would just be listed as the complainant, or witnesses would be anonymized. What I think is interesting though is how we would treat the respondent's confidentiality. So like what Terry was saying earlier, if a violation has been found, you know, this person is a public servant, there's very little right to privacy interest that's at stake. I mean, there's been a violation. I don't see any reason why we would have to anonymize their information. But if there was no violation found, or even in these cases where the board has declined to review it further, it sounds like there probably is a privacy interest for the respondent. If they've waived confidentiality, then, you know, of course, there would be no issue. But if the respondent has not waived confidentiality, I think there would be still benefit in publishing an anonymized version that wouldn't identify the respondent either. So I've drafted some of those as well. For example, the public facility issue that we were describing earlier, where it simply refers to, you know, a public servant who works in a department, you know, had this issue come up, but not given enough information where they could be identified by name.
I really like that idea, Paul. So it sounds like you've already done the work, and I should have just let you lead this discussion. But it seems like
I
perhaps
haven't-
the next step then is that I think we can then adopt this framework as a board, which is effectively that we do want to share anonymized versions of our opinions online, both in the advisory opinion context and in the ethics complaint for potential violation context, utilizing this structure that you have recommended, in which we would have anonymized decisions, with the exception of where we find a violation by a specific public servant, in which case the name would remain, but the posting would not include the identity of the complainant or the identity of any witnesses consulted in the process.
I have one thought. So I mean, everything that Paul said about the letter writing, I think is awesome. But what if we put our we continue to put online the advisory opinions, but we never put online our potential ethic violation opinions? Just because I think that for me, while I mean, Terry's point's well taken, you know, that is a form of sort of, I would say, punishment, right? Like, you know, you violated this, and so now we are going to publish this because of that violation. But on the flip side, the confidentiality component is so complicated that I feel like it errs on the side of safety just not to publish this potential violation on the website, but to send a letter the way that Paul kind of laid it out, to do that component of it. That's my thought.
Yeah, and I think that's totally within the board's discretion. So how the code breaks it down, though, the difference between advisory opinions and complaints. So advisory opinions have to be published on the website because there's that educational component of other members, but complaints have to be distributed as public records. So
yeah, whatever that means, right?
Whatever,
I mean, like, I like the way you formulated that, Paul, because then if we got a public records request, it seems like we have a very clear document we could hand over without any question about compliance with 390. The thing that sticks with me that's a little hard is, like, if we put all these up publicly, like, I kind of want to identify, if we're going to identify the respondent, I kind of want to identify the complainant, just because there's a lot of context here in this community that has to do with people's personal political histories and relationships and et cetera, that it seems like, but I don't know, maybe we don't care, right? If we determine that a public servant has violated the code, maybe we don't care if if it was reported by the person they beat for their assembly seat, who hates them violently because they called each other names for 6 months in election, and then the one person lost and went and filed an ethics complaint against the person who won. Maybe that context doesn't matter. Maybe it's entirely about the behavior of the public servant, and there is no, just reason to include the identity of the complainant.
This is only if we decide there is a violation. We include just the name.
Yeah, if we determine that there
the
isn't a
response.
violation, I thought what I heard Paul say was the recommendation would be we would put an anonymized version up on the web. We could put an anonymized version up on the website that is completely anonymous, like doesn't include the identity of the public servant. And then if we did determine there was a violation, we could elect to put up a version that does identify the public servant at issue who has violated the code.
Yes, that would be correct. It would only be if there's a violation, but so the board's decision would be that section that deals with public records says that public records are supposed to be provided and basically maximize public's access to the records.
Are you talking about 390, Paul, or are you talking about 115?
So I think it's 390. The introductory paragraph that talks about, we're supposed to make public records easily accessible to the public or maximize the public's access to them.
Yeah,
so
390.010. It is the policy of the municipality to provide the fullest and most rapid public access to municipal records and information so that the right of the people to remain informed is protected.
Yeah, that's kind of where I land on the complaint. So the advisory opinions we have to publish, but we don't have to publish the complaints on the website. But based on that policy guidance, maybe the board wants to consider that's how they distribute the public records, would be to publish them. And I think if we've anonymized the complainant and the witness, there wouldn't be any potential violation or issue with us publishing them. Then it's just what we want to do with the complainant's name, which would be the board's discretion.
So if someone asks for a public record of a violation complaint that we finish and we put up a report, but we didn't put it on the website, but we have a report of it, we have to hand that report over, or we have to essentially give them that report because they filed for it as a public record request, right?
It's more complicated than that. There's a process where like it's routed. They go to I think they go to the clerk's office still, and then there's like a consideration. You get a certain number of days under the code to respond, and then within the number of days, the municipality has to indicate the length of time that that the municipality will reasonably require in order to determine whether or not the records can be disclosed. And then there's like an analysis to see if anything can be withheld, and potentially there are some redactions, and then there's a charge for most public records. The requestor can receive anything that they are legally entitled to receive at the conclusion of that process.
Do they have to know the document exists to ask for it?
No, you can ask for any and all emails from every assembly member ever referencing Rabbi Abram Goodstein, and you can, and then that's part of the process, because then the clerk's office or somebody would come back to you and say it's going to take this many man hours for us to go back and read. Search every single email that every assembly member has ever sent. Would you consider narrowing your search? And then you can just come back and forth in the process too. But you can often reporters will request any minutes of meetings concerning the sale of municipal light and power, or any you can they'll just do a big swath and then go back and forth and see what they can narrow.
Okay.
I don't know. I have a little bit of heartburn about putting up our opinions on ethics complaints for potential violation, but I think largely because I think I'm driven by the fact that most of the issues we have found a violation. The facts have indicated a well-meaning public servant who either was not aware of the code because they were new to the position, or attempted to apply the code correctly but may have had a misstep. And I worry about putting those people's names up in public as violators of the code, when it is a very rare instance in which we have anyone who is an Anchorage public servant who is legitimately flouting ethical guidelines in such a way that they require the wearing of the hair shirt imposed by Terry. Like, I don't know. I feel like I still have a bit of not entirely reasonable discomfort with us putting up non-anonymized versions of our decisions on complaints or potential violation.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Terry. I just like as an educator, I try not to shame children. Like even children that like are really bad. I don't want to shame them because I don't think that works. And I fear the same thing. Like I hear that as a power that we have that I'm essentially saying let's let go of. But I think shaming politicians for violating ethics complaints, especially when they're well intended, I think has a bad could be have not end well essentially, and I'd rather err cautiously.
You're on mute, Terry.
Terry, we can't hear you.
Terry, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
You're saying something very thoughtful. We can tell from
My
your face.
concern is that from a strategic perspective, or instrumentally speaking, it's the main bite that the code has. To be honest, that. And I've had detail this to me a million times. I'd be like, oh yeah, they're coming to you. They want to make sure they're checking things through with you because they don't want to have a complaint filed against them, and they don't want to be, publicly exposed for having violated the code. Without that, I'll be honest with you. Without that, since we very rarely recommend any sanctions, and maybe we could start changing that practice, but we have no teeth to implement any sanctions.
I don't think we can anymore. The code, the old code gave us all kinds of we could recommend all kinds of things, but we haven't done this in years. Like, I don't know when the last time, like there must be some hidden website somewhere that is no longer publicly available that contains things from more than 8 years ago.
Oh yeah, no, it was a long time ago. It was when the code that we replaced a few years ago, when it was the brand new code. So we were talking then about like, oh, the new code, and here's this junction between the new code and the old code. So it's true we haven't done it in a while. I would assume if you asked around amongst politicians, I would assume that they assume that we could do that, right? That if there is a violation and we find that there's a violation, it'll be very embarrassing for them, and because it'll go up on the website, it'll be a publicly distributed document. And you're right. Maybe we shouldn't think about it so strategically, but in my experience, a fair number of politicians and even public servants generally are awfully instrumental people, to be perfectly honest. And that I think for some people, unfortunately, it's unfortunate that's this way. But for some people, were it not for, the sword of Damocles, right? Like were it not for that threat, they would just sort of ignore the code because there would be no consequences whatsoever. Maybe word filters out informally, right? That somehow it gets to the press that there was this investigation and we reached this conclusion. But then to me, that would be even stranger, right? Then you'd have the media reporting on a conclusion that we've reached about an investigation interpreted through a letter sent to, let's say, the complainant, but with no official documentation that the board is actually put up, that's the board's made publicly available as a report of its own.
All right, I'm swayed. I'm willing to buy into Paul's partially anonymized documentation. Maybe if we could, as a next step, Paul, whenever you're done, have you circulate a packet of all of the opinions you've reviewed and confidentialized to the board, and we can give them a review and then like approve them for publication as a future agenda item, and then we could in the future take as a future for form purposes, draft our opinions in the form that you've suggested, anonymizing the identity of the complainant and the witnesses and not anonymizing the identity of the respondent in instances where we find a violation, and appending that to a cover letter which identifies the complainant by name.
Yeah, I could do that. I can finish drafting those responses. What I might suggest is, since the time is limited for the board with those issues in January that might have to get done before February if people's terms expires, maybe setting this for after we've resolved all those complaints that are still on the agenda, but it would be up to the board. Since this isn't really a pressing issue, it's just kind
Yeah,
of
that's
develop-
fine. I think this is kind of a ministerial matter. I mean, I expect that, what I would expect is we would hopefully not have lengthy discussion of them in a meeting, but just it feels like we should, as a matter of course, receive them from you, review them, and make some kind of motion on the record to publish them, and then go from there. Do I have a motion from the board directing Paul to finalize his partially anonymized versions of our decisions for publication on the board, for, I guess, review by the board at a future meeting and then publication on our website?
So moved.
Second.
I vote in favor of that as well. And we are now at the end of our time. So I think all other agenda items are tabled to a future meeting, and we should talk about scheduling, because I think we are going to need to have 2 meetings in January, our regular meeting and a special meeting, especially in light of the fact that we may lose quorum in February unless action is taken by the mayor and the assembly to fully constitute the board. So what is the availability of the board for a regular and special meeting in January?
Well, I am around. I am really wide open the first 2 weeks of January. The spring semester doesn't start until the 3rd week of January. So I'm wide open for the first 2 weeks. And then after that, this time continues to work, as do Tuesday and Thursday afternoons.
For me, this time continues to work. I am around all of January. Abram, is there any restrictions on your end?
I'm not seeing too many this time. This time's good for me.
What if we scheduled meetings on Wednesday, January 11th and Wednesday, January 18th, back to back to address these issues? I mean, I think the 4th, it's maybe challenging because it's a short week and people may still be on some kind of vacation or holiday, and it's relatively close, to today's date. Whereas if we schedule the 11th and 18th and then divided up the various guests and matters that we have on the docket as between those 2 dates and tried to stick everything into one day or the other, we could potentially make some real headway.
Yeah, I can meet during those two
I
times.
can do that as well. Madam Clerk, are there any other any barriers to us meeting on those 2 days?
Just to make sure I got it, January 11th and January 18th, both 2:30 to 4:30, both virtual format.
Correct.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, and
those
could
will
you and
work.
I and Megan set a quick meeting for Monday to talk through administrative division of like people as between those 2 meetings so that we can make sure we get everybody on the calendar who is awaiting a decision from us?
You bet, as in this coming Monday?
Yeah, is that possible?
Yeah, absolutely. Megan, does that work for you?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. With that, do I have a motion to adjourn from a member of the board?
So moved.
Yeah, second.
All right, we stand adjourned. Thank you guys for a productive meeting.
Hey,
Bye,
thank you.
y'all.
Take
Take
care,
care.
Bye.